I'd like to call the meeting to order, and our first order of business is to wish Chairman Towns a happy birthday. Okay, on three, let's hear it. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday, Chairman Towns, and welcome. Thank you for sitting in with us. All right, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's hearing examining the application of green building practices in the federal sector. In recent years, there's been a movement towards greening various aspects of the federal government, for improving energy efficiency to constructing buildings with environmentally sustainable materials and technology. The subcommittee will receive testimony from the General Services Administration, the Department of Energy, and the Environmental Protection Agency, in addition to several witnesses from the private sector. I welcome our list of distinguished panelists and thank them for their participation. Today's hearing will explore how well the key agencies responsible for greening federal buildings are progressing and what additional steps should be taken to assure that the federal government is being proactive in its approach to green building practices. Despite the recent growth in green building construction and retrofitting of existing buildings across the federal government, Congress has been slow to conduct oversight in this area, in part due to the rapid growth in green building projects and also due to the range of agencies involved in the undertaking. Some of the issues I hope our panelists will address today include finding out how successful current federal green building programs have been to date and what tangible outcomes have resulted from the agency's collaborations with various government working groups, such as the Interagency Sustainable Working Group, which is managed by the Department of Energy. I'm particularly interested in hearing from today's witnesses on how the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, or ESA, and Executive Order 13514, among other relative statutes, have set the parameters for green building practices, and how effectively agencies are coordinating their efforts across the government to meet the timelines for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and achieve zero net usage in federal buildings by 2030, as directed by Executive Order 13514. Given the ongoing debate about the merits of various green building certification standards and ratings systems, and DOZ pending notice of proposed rulemaking calling for revised performance standards and for a uniform set of green building standards, I'm interested in hearing from the witnesses as to what they might think is the best approach for the government to take in adopting a uniform set of green building certification standards. With the infusion of funds from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, agencies have received additional assistance in meeting the requirements for achieving energy efficiency and increasing the stock of renovated or new green buildings. However, as this source of funding winds down, there's a growing concern that agencies will have difficulty in continuing to achieve their goals by the dates outlined in ESA and related executive orders. I'm therefore interested in hearing how GSA, DOE, and EPA intend to advance their green buildings agenda on an ongoing basis, given their budget projections and the deadlines imposed by Congress and the executive branch. There has been an emphasis on energy reduction usage as it pertains to green building projects, and the subcommittee would like the panelists' input on how Congress may provide constructive guidelines and assistance in this area. And finally, I'd like to hear more about how the federal government's implementation of green building practices is affecting the growth of green buildings across the country. Again, I want to thank our panelists for joining us today, and I look forward to their testimony. And with that, I would like to call on Mr. Bilbray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you having this hearing. And Madam Chair, I'd just like to start off by apologizing to the panel, because before you stands a man who stands as a very strong critic. I'm very cynical about this entire concept. Sadly, I'm not so cynic by nature. I'm a very optimistic person. Living proof is I actually thought I could get elected someday. But the fact is, after 40 years involvement in environmental movement, over 34 years involvement in government environmental strategies, just history has taught me that government is quick to make promises about the environment, and not just slow to delivery, but almost lacking in delivery. You know, we promised people that we're going to clean up our gasoline. We put additives in that not only rob our gas mileage, but pollute our air and claim it's good for the environment. We promised to create offsets for the Washington Capitol, and said we were going to make sure that we're not responsible for pollution. And while we continue to burn dirty coal to power our federal operations, we talk about how terrible it is and how we're so far against it, but we subsidize it consistently. Frankly, as I look at this issue, I see that it has been government regulation that stand in front of innovative alternative technologies that could not only save energy but save natural resources. And so I've got to apologize up front. I'm going to be very critical of saying it sounds good in a report, but does it actually work out? I mean, I've actually seen government agencies tell individuals who've used appropriate alternative construction techniques tear it down because it's not because it's bad, but because it's unapproved by the government process yet. Sad commentary to the fact that those of us in government are quick to require everyone else or expect everyone else to change the way they do business, the way they live, the way they make everyday decisions. But government is so slow to change our regulations, our attitudes, and our procedures to reflect the environmental reality that all of us, including and especially those of us in government, have a responsibility to share. So with that, enjoy the testimony. I look forward to getting your little tidbits of wit and wisdom on this. But I am very critical that there's a huge gap, Madam Chair, between the theoretical approach here in Washington of what we think is going to get done and hope to get done and what actually happens in the real world. And I hope by this hearing we can help to try to bridge that gap. Now, yield back.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for recognizing my birthday. Thank you. And let me thank you and Congressman Bilbray for holding this hearing. Over the past several years, Americans have increasingly focused on ways to save energy while also saving money. This focus has given way to the popularity of what many see as part of a solution to America's energy needs, going green. The backbone of going green is saving energy, and saving energy means saving the environment and saving money. Today, we are here to talk about going green as it relates to the construction of federal buildings. In other words, buildings paid for with taxpayers' dollars. The federal government is the nation's largest energy consumer. Green building practices are essential to achieving the goal of energy conservation, and I fully support green initiatives. Going green is essential not only to the sustainability of our environment, but to the sustainability of our country. However, I do have some questions about the government's progress in implementing green initiatives, like the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. Let me conclude by saying I am interested in learning how federal agencies plan to continue greening the government once Recovery Act funds are no longer available. While I am all for the greening of federal buildings, I strongly believe that we need to invest taxpayers' dollars very wisely. We need to make sure money is spent only on green initiatives that are cost-effective. And I strongly feel that the government ought to be leading the way to energy independence. But the question is, are we doing it right? That's the question. And I hope you can help us answer that question today. Madam Chair, I yield back, and I look forward to the testimony.
I yield now to Mr. Lukemire for opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no statement this time.
Okay. I'll now yield to Mr. Cuellar for opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, and Mr. Chairman again. First of all, I want to thank the witnesses to be here that are with us here today. I think what we're looking at, we're certainly looking at some opportunities, and I think we're all familiar with the opportunities, what it means to green the buildings, and I think the ranking member is right that, you know, if we're going to be asking the private sector to do certain things, we ought to look at our own reflection and see what we're doing with GSA or with the other agencies to make sure that we do the same thing if we're going to be asking the private sector to do that. I think we're familiar with opportunities, what it means to the workplace, and I think our first witness has talked about what's not only a building to look at, but it's a place to work and to spend a lot of time there. But I think what we ought to look at today, and what I'm interested in, Madam Chair, is that we look at what are the performance measures. You know, when we talk about greening, what does that mean? How do we actually? I'm not interested in measuring activity. I'm more interested in measuring the results of what we mean by greening. What about the having the trained federal agency staff to make sure that we oversee those results? What does that mean? And if we contract energy saving performance contracts, making sure that we have that available. Certainly, you know, activities and efforts to comply with the provisions in ISA is important also. And the other thing that I'm looking at also is to, as we do those performance measures, make sure that one agency, another agency, the other agencies are using uniformity in those performance measures. And again, we have to be very careful about this, Madam Chair, because I think in the past when we talked about performance measures, agencies, with all due respect sometimes, and I think members of Congress do the same thing, is that we measure the activity. How many, what are we doing to do this? But I think the results, and that's the definitional challenges that we face, is I think what we ought to be looking at. So again, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I think we're going to have a great hearing. Thank you to the witnesses.
And I will now yield to Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you so much for holding this hearing, which I think is actually very important. While I certainly join with my friend from San Diego in the caveat he laid in front of us, I cannot join with him in his avowed cynicism. I actually think this is an exciting challenge with enormous potential. And when I was chairman of Fairfax County until I came to this Congress, we were doing similar things, requiring LEED certification of all of our government buildings. A standard reflected certainly in in the commitment embodied in the Energy Independence and Security Act, ISA, and the Executive Order 13514. We spend $24.5 billion a year in energy cost as a federal government for federal facilities. And if we can meet the standards we've set for ourselves of 26% energy savings by going to LEED certified buildings, we can save $6 billion of that cost every year. $6 billion. That's not trivial. That is significant. And those are real savings to be had as we move forward. And so I think the potential is enormous, and we just got to, as my friend from Texas just said, we've got to have real metrics and measurable goals and milestones along the way to make sure we're in fact reaching that savings. But that savings can really help us a lot as we go forward. We've already got 12 LEED certified buildings. We're committed to carbon neutral buildings, and we have one now, I guess, in Denver. Obviously, this committee wants to know more about, well, all right, what are the plans to making sure we get to our goals by 2030, because they're generating 33% lower greenhouse gas emissions than normal buildings. I might add that sometimes there are upfront costs in going to LEED certified buildings, but the payoff is considerable. In my county, for example, we, as a matter of measurement, said, okay, it cost a little bit more to initially build a green certified building. But by year 14, we start saving net money, and we fully recoup those costs, and we start saving money every year thereafter. And we, as a lifespan, put 40 years in a building, even though we usually get more. At the federal government, it's much more dramatic. We put 100 years on a building. So the out years in terms of cost savings are quite considerable. The other thing we're committed to is pre-development hydrology standards for stormwater runoff at federal facilities. Very important for endangered estuaries, very important for fragile ecosystems. Certainly here in the National Capital Region, a very important standard as we're trying to restore the Chesapeake Bay, the largest estuary in the United States. And finally, Madam Chairwoman, I believe low-impact development techniques can make a big difference when we're looking at the entirety of a federal facility. It may be, pervious pavers. It may be rain gardens on the roof. It may be an alternative to, asphalted and impervious surface parking lot. I will say, however, in my view, we should not be building one-for-one structured parking spaces on a federal facility next to a transit station. That defeats the whole purpose of what we're trying to do here, and it is an unnecessary expense to the taxpayer, and I think we have to abandon that practice. But we also, in urban areas, need to use these techniques to lower, if you will, what's known as the heat island effect. We know that in some urban areas, the temperature variance can be 22 degrees higher Fahrenheit than in the comparable rural areas because of the radiant heat effect on asphalt and buildings and structures. So we, the federal government, need to make sure that we're cognizant of that and addressing that as well. Every 1 degree increase in Celsius increases ground ozone levels by 5%, leading to higher asthma rates and other respiratory ailments. So we have an obligation to be addressing that too. But finally, Madam Chairwoman, I want to congratulate you for holding this in a series of hearings. I think this is a very significant hearing, and I think here is an opportunity for the federal government to strike a blow for the environment, for public health, and to help save significant amounts of taxpayer dollars while we're at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. If there's no additional statements, the subcommittee will now receive the testimony from our witnesses that are before us today. We'll now turn to our first panel. It's the policy of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform to swear in all witnesses before they testify. And I'd like to ask all of you to please stand and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative, and you may be seated. And I'll now introduce the first panel. And I'd like to start now with Kevin Gamshure, and who is the Director of the Office of Federal High Performance Green Buildings for the General Services Administration. Mr. Gamshure, are we pronouncing that correctly? Gamshure oversees the framework for which GSA responds to the challenges of greenhouse gas emission reductions and of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act's mandate to move GSA's federal building inventory towards high-performance green buildings. Kathleen Hogan is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy Efficiency in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, where her portfolio of $900 million annually includes energy efficiency, policy, program, and research. Previous as a division director, Dr. Hogan directed EPA's clean energy programs and focused on removing market barriers for energy efficiency and renewable energy. And Dennis Bushta is the Deputy Assistant Director in the Office of Administration for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Bushta previously served as EPA's Director of Safety, Health, and Environmental Management Division and as Acting Director of Facilities Management Services Division. He was Director of Industrial Relations for Newmont Minerals Corporation, and he has worked as an adjunct faculty member at the West Virginia University. And I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you very much for being here this morning. I ask that each one of the witnesses now give a brief summary of their testimony and to keep this summary under 5 minutes if you can do that. Your complete written testimony will be included in the hearing record. And Mr. Gamshure, please proceed.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Watson, Ranking Member Bilbray, and members of this subcommittee. My name is Kevin Gamshure, and I'm the Director of the Office of Federal High Performance Green Buildings in the U.S. General Services Administration. Thank you for inviting us today to discuss the progress and challenges with green building practices in the federal government, and thank you for including my full written statement into the record. In 2007, under the Energy Independence and Security Act, Congress created the Office of Federal High Performance Green Buildings to enable and enhance federal leadership in sustainable real property portfolio management and operations. The office now combines deep knowledge of federal processes with multidisciplinary expertise in high-performing green buildings, providing leadership both within GSA and the federal government, as well as influence and interaction with the broader commercial property market to ensure that our buildings minimize their burden on both the environment and the taxpayer. A principal duty of the office is to ensure full coordination of high-performance green building information and activities within GSA, and this duty expanded with the passage of the Recovery Act. Under the Recovery Act, GSA received $5.55 billion to be reinvested in the federal buildings portfolio and to create a few new buildings as well on an accelerated basis. And in fact, GSA to date has done 4 times as much work in this regard as it ever has done before. And today we stand with contracts in place of $4.4 billion. GSA has leveraged its specialized expertise in sustainability and procurement practices to support the investment of these funds consistent with the intent of the Recovery Act. In the months immediately following the passage of the Recovery Act, we engaged directly across GSA in the public buildings in particular, service in particular, to provide support to the development of and the plan for executing these projects. We established minimum performance criteria to guide the scoping and execution of projects to transform federal buildings into high-performance green buildings that use less energy, have better indoor environmental quality and health and performance conditions, reduce pollution, and produce less waste. Building tune-up, lighting, HVAC, retrofit and replacement, renewable energy generation, and water conservation projects have all been incorporated into projects based on the limits of funding, the scope of the act, and return on investment analysis for the components of the investment. An example of a project taking full advantage of these greening opportunities is the modernization of the Edith Green Wendell White Federal Building in Portland, Oregon. It will attain LEED Platinum, the highest LEED rating available under the U.S. Green Building Council's LEED rating system. Using advanced design features, including radiant panels, different fenestration on different sides of the building to react differently to the way that the sun rises and sets in that particular climate, the structure will consume 60% less energy of a typical office building in that location, and will incorporate a facade that is designed specifically for the location within the city. I might also add that the oldest planted roof in GSA's inventory is on the parking garage of that same building. It was planted in 1975 and has never leaked. Another example of the new Department of Homeland Security headquarters that we're building on the St. Elizabeth's campus in Washington, D.C. The initial building, the new Coast Guard headquarters, will have 5 acres of vegetated roof, narrow floor plates to maximize access to natural light, an innovative heating system that will be using combined heat and power for the facility and provide infrastructure support for the rest of the Department of Homeland Security in that campus, as well as being highly transit accessible. We are leveraging our Recovery Act investments to turn our large, varied, and stable inventory of buildings into a proving ground for green building technologies, materials, and operating regimes in order to become one of the real estate industry's sources for data on the actual performance of systems in use. And we will be measuring that performance over a minimum of 3 years after complete operation and acceptance. We have worked to support and apply the most effective green building rating systems and standards, drawing on objective analysis performed by the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, managed by the Department of Energy. GSI has identified LEED as the most effective rating standard for the federal real property inventory to attain, with a focus on the LEED new construction system and a growing focus on existing buildings. GSA requires that a LEED rating of gold or better be part of the design criteria for all new construction and major renovation projects, and the current agency currently has 48 LEED certified owned and leased buildings, with approximately 150 more working towards accreditation at the end of their project period. 18 of these projects to date have exceeded the minimum with LEED Gold certifications, and one GSA lease, the FBI Regional Office in Chicago, has achieved the LEED Platinum rating for existing buildings, the first of those ratings ever to be given. The Energy Star system, developed by EPA and the Department of Energy together and managed by them, is also used by GSA and other federal agencies. GSA today has over 130 buildings with Energy Star ratings, and we are expanding that into the leased inventory as well. We track environmentally preferable purchasing in compliance with federal mandates, and just want to conclude with a couple of challenges related to measuring green building performance outcomes. A key issue is increasing the number of advanced or smart meters in federal buildings that track energy and water usage, which we are doing in every building that was touched by Recovery Act funds. Indoor environmental quality is particularly difficult to track and measure because it involves such a wide variety of pollutants as well as atmospheric conditions, all of which can both interact with each other and impact occupants' health and productivity in many ways. Research to develop user-friendly indoor environmental quality metrics is needed. Another area that the federal government's ability to invest in projects with greatest environmental benefits would also be advanced is that the authority of agencies to make contracts for renewable energy were extended from the current limit in GSA's authorizing legislation of 10 years to 20 years. And this would allow a cost-effective creation of markets for renewable energy that is not there. And finally, GSA has a long history of working cooperatively and effectively with federal partners, and I will cover that in the longer testimony that's there. And with that, I think I should stop because I'm over my time. Thank you very much.
We will now proceed on to Ms. Hogan.
Good morning, Chairman Watson, Ranking Member Bilbray, and members of the subcommittee. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about the Department of Energy's efforts with federal green buildings. The federal government is becoming a leader in green building practices across its 3.2 billion square feet and its very large annual facility energy bill. And it is raising the bar through Executive Order 13514 that was signed in October 2009. These efforts do make good sense by providing significant savings in taxpayer dollars, significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and of course creating jobs. Today I would like to update the subcommittee on federal facility performance, share how the federal agencies do collaborate to make buildings more energy efficient and sustainable, and to discuss some additions to the federal toolkit that could help the government more readily achieve future statutory targets and others recently set by Executive Order 13514. The Department's Federal Energy Management Program, or FEMP, works with agencies to help them improve and to track their performance on key sustainability metrics that have been set forth by statute as well as executive orders. Preliminary data for fiscal year '09 are quite promising and show a number of things. They show a reduction in energy intensity of about 13% relative to fiscal year 2003, surpassing the annual goal that had been set. The data also show an increase in renewable energy use, which now meets more than 4% of the government's electricity demand, also surpassing the fiscal year 2009 goal. The data show a decrease of more than 4% in water intensity relative to 2007, surpassing the fiscal year 2009 goal. And the data show close to full compliance, 99%, with metering the electricity use in the buildings where that's appropriate, and show very high compliance with the design of new federal buildings to be substantially more efficient than the typical building built to code. Further, we do expect to have strong results for fiscal year 2010 as investment in energy efficiency and renewable energy at federal agencies did increase 84% in fiscal year 2009 over the prior year, for really the highest year ever at about $1.7 billion. Now, success does take a team effort, and the Department of Energy does work closely with GSA, EPA, and the other agencies. We are organized through Executive Order 13514 into a set of topical working groups with clear roles and responsibilities. Through these working groups, we can tap the communal knowledge and resources available across the entire federal government, and my written statement provides greater detail on those efforts. So as we look forward, we know we have taken big strides. We also see that we have more room to drive down energy costs in federal facilities and to meet future statutory and executive order requirements. Energy efficiency does remain a top priority. There are literally hundreds of off-the-shelf technologies and products the government can use to save energy, technologies and products that are life cycle cost effective, the placebo effect. As facilities last decades, these energy efficient retrofits can reap rewards for years to come. Cool roofs are another important efficiency measure. Cool roofs reflect the sunlight and reduce heat gain, lower air conditioning bills for direct benefits, as well as improve air quality. Just this week, DOE released guidelines for selecting cool roofs for federal agencies, and the Department Secretary Chu sent a memo to departmental leadership instructing them to use cool roofs when building or replacing existing roofs. The federal government has a number of tools to overcome the higher initial costs of energy efficiency and renewable energy, which do frequently hinder investment. For example, as mentioned, energy-saving performance contracts, which can provide investment capital to improve federal facilities. This tool has provided around $2.3 billion in federal facilities investment and helping us save more than 18 trillion BTUs of energy annually, enough energy to power a city slightly larger than Kansas City, Missouri. With a few additional tools, we could help deploy energy efficiency and renewable energy at greater scale, which is necessary to meet our future targets. For example, as just mentioned, We cannot currently use power purchase agreements broadly across the federal government, except for the Defense Department and the Western Area Power Administration. The government can only enter 10-year agreements with renewable energy producers. Extending that renewable energy power purchase authority to 20 or 25 years for all the agencies, as well as changing the way these projects are scored in the budget process, could significantly increase renewable energy use across the government. We also need to look at ways for federal agencies to reinvest savings to support additional retrofits so we can save even more money rather than reducing the agency operating budgets to match the reduced use of energy and water. And lastly, if the definition of renewable energy were changed to include renewable thermal energy that displaces our need for electricity, the agencies would have a much wider set of options for low-cost renewable energy. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to share this update, and we'll be pleased to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
And we thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Booster.
Chairman Watson, Ranking Member Bilbray, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for providing me with the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's work, success stories, and challenges associated with green building practices and improving environmental performance in federal facilities. EPA occupies nearly 11 million square feet of office, support, and laboratory space across the country. The agency relies upon the General Services Administration to acquire virtually all of its office and non-laboratory support facilities. The agency is currently meeting or exceeding the green building requirements found in the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 and Executive Order 13514, and considers itself to be a leader in the federal government in the renovation and construction of green buildings in both facilities owned by EPA and those provided through GSA. We have worked very hard to acquire the U.S. Green Building Council's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design LEED New Construction Certification for buildings we have constructed or are leasing through GSA and private property owners. As of last December, EPA had gold or silver certification for over 186,000 square feet of property that we own and over 1 million square feet of rented property. EPA has reduced energy at its reporting facilities by over 18% since 2003. Since September of 2006, the agency has acquired delivered green power and renewable energy certificates equivalent to 100% of its conventional electricity use. In addition, the agency has applied a variety of innovative approaches to reduce water use by almost 11% since 2007. Both EPA and GSA facilities contain numerous green roofs, large and small pervious pavement parking lots, rain gardens, and systems to harvest and reuse rainwater. EPA also makes extensive use of recycled materials in its construction projects. Energy efficiency is an essential component of green buildings. Several of our offices include EPA's Region 8 building in Denver, Colorado, which has earned the Energy Star rating, further highlighting the significance that EPA and GSA place on achieving top energy performance. The agency currently has systems in place to collect and measure data for energy efficiency, water conservation, construction waste recycling, and Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas facility emissions. And throughout the federal government, agencies are working together to improve systems for collecting information related to employee commuting and waste diversion rates. EPA works within its appropriation to implement the many dimensions of our green building program. We are currently exploring ways to fund upgrading old mechanical systems in 4 million square feet of our laboratories to improve their energy efficiency. The agency is also committed to finding ways to ensure that building operators are available and trained to oversee and maintain increasingly more complex green building equipment. EPA believes that Congress and the executive branch played a significant role in promoting the design and use of green buildings through the passage of the current federal laws and executive orders, which set challenging energy and water reduction goals for federal facilities. These current requirements have and will continue to make a meaningful impact in helping EPA and other agencies achieve significant energy reductions and improve their environmental performance. EPA has shared a very positive experience in collaborating on numerous projects with other federal agencies in promoting green facilities. The Interagency Energy Task Force and the Interagency Sustainability Working Group, coordinated by Department of Energy and GSA, have provided a critical service in assembling and sharing information about best practices, and GSA has provided a testing ground for new technologies and design approaches. Several online energy management tracking and assessment tools that EPA developed include Portfolio Manager and Target Finder. An estimated 20% of the commercial building market, representing 15 billion square feet, uses Portfolio Manager to track energy and water usage, assess the performance of buildings, set goals, and make reductions across building portfolios. Some of EPA's greatest success in promoting green buildings and technologies can be found in our numerous voluntary partnership and product labeling programs, including Energy Star, Water Sense, and Climate Leaders, just to name several. By following the Energy Star guidelines for energy management, buildings can achieve, on average, a 35% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and realize energy savings. EPA has also issued stormwater guidance to provide information about permeable pavement and roofing options that address environmental issues associated with water runoff. EPA strongly endorses the many benefits associated with green buildings and looks forward to continuing our work with the subcommittee, our partners throughout other federal agencies, and the public to ensure an economically and environmentally healthier country. Thank you again for inviting me to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much. I'd first like to make this statement, and I'm sure that all of our members would concur, that we're struck by the fact that the federal government is the nation's largest consumer and greenhouse gas emitter. And I'm particularly struck by the fact that our nation's buildings account for 40% of our primary energy use. Obviously, the federal government can and must play a leading role in providing guidance on how the buildings must be constructed in the future to maximize the goals of energy efficiency and environmental sustainability. And I appreciate the testimony. I think that you have addressed a lot of the initial areas of concern that I have. I'll call on other members in just a second. But I'd like to start with Mr. Kamshire and say, is the GSA committed to eventually making all of its buildings LEED certified? And if so, how long will this take, and at what cost to government?
Today, we require every major renovation and new construction project and major lease construction project to achieve a LEED Gold rating. That's the new buildings. We are currently—
so most of it is prospective.
Correct. And the existing buildings is a large component of Executive Order 13514, as well as some previous executive orders. The current goal is to have a minimum of 15% of our inventory certified by 2015. We are actually looking at accelerating that. We will not have the schedule for acceleration probably for several months yet, but we believe that we can do more in the short run with existing buildings, especially based on the work that we're doing with the Environmental Protection Agency to use Energy Star Portfolio Manager as a screening. So what we will be doing is looking at how many of the buildings today are capable, but we just don't happen to know it, of achieving such a rating. We currently are on track to meet that 15% goal. We do not expect that the cost of achieving those ratings will be an incremental change to our budget requests, because we have seen that as we move these buildings to greater energy performance, that those kinds of improvements that we make to achieve the ratings actually pay for themselves in relatively short order. In yesterday's meeting that was hosted by the White House on related topics of high-performance green buildings, Ken Hubbard from the Heinz Corporation stated that his company, when they take over a new building from another owner, can typically reduce the energy consumption by 20% solely through the imposition of better management practices and better measurement metrics combined with their pre-existing high-quality labor force. So we are hoping to emulate some of those practices in our existing buildings and accelerate that. And I would ask that as we get that plan closer, that we could submit it to you.
Great. Ms. Hogan, would you like to come in?
We, at the Department of Energy, are also looking to see what we can do with our existing buildings. As you just heard, there are important requirements for the new buildings, which we are, of course, on target to meet. So a big part of the question is how you address the existing building stock. What we are doing, somewhat similarly to GSA, is undertaking sort of an information collection effort to really better understand the state of these buildings, figure out what we can do, and implementing a number of initiatives to see how we can improve them, quickly and in a way that will get the savings that is there to be gotten, as well as to train the people that are out there that need to be trained to maintain that continued improvement. So really investing in the infrastructure so we can get these low-cost savings.
And Mr. Bushler, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. EPA's real federal property inventory primarily consists of laboratories, which tend to be a bit more energy intensive, environmentally intensive, and a bit more complex. And because of that inventory, we are able to, or we have applied a number of different approaches, first starting with commissioning and recommissioning of the mechanical systems, updating technologies, and making some renovations. And on the new construction and major construction, we believe we are in line with meeting those requirements. In some of our older structures, we are currently working at upgrading those and plan to hit those targets in a timely fashion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, I know I was pointing out some of the things that we're not doing. We talk a lot on what we're not doing. I just like to point out an example that today there's 155 applications for siting renewable energy facilities on Bureau of Land Management property in California alone. 155. Been there for years. Not one permit has been issued. It's easier to say no than it is to try to move forward because there's risk. I'd like to sort of back up and start where it all starts, and that's when the energy enters our federal facilities. Where is the electricity coming from that is lighting these light bulbs?
It's coming from the PJM grid with a series of different production facilities contracted for by PEPCO, generally speaking.
And what is their major energy sources?
PEPCO, I believe, has a portfolio that is predominantly coal-fired plants, but with some renewable energy mixed in there. We can certainly look up that information as it's recorded in the Energy Information Agency of the Department of Energy.
Well, let me just tell you, as a Californian, when I came here, I was appalled to see the coal plants here. In California, you go to prison for burning coal, okay? And for the federal government to be so, so punitive at those of us in California while we struggle to clean up our environment, then to come here and see what appears to be a total lack of standards, really concerned me that we ourselves at the federal government. Now, I know one thing about energy, the ability to wheel. Are you here today saying that this is the cleanest portfolio that we can legally purchase, that we are forced in the capital of the United States to have to buy dirty, cold energy to generate our light bulbs? Have you had anybody look at the possibility of wheeling and specifically purchasing zero-emission electricity?
Today, GSA purchases zero-emission electricity at about 10% of its total electricity purchases across the board, and we have committed to reach 30% within by year 2020.
Why 10%? Why don't we basically say, look, we're in the market, we'll go buy zero-emission electricity and wheel it into the region? Why? Because are we worried about the price of buying clean energy? Is that the problem? And I only say this because I know in California, and I think that Madam Chair will know that, consumers have the ability to go shop, purchase clean technology, even if it's paid at a premium, but that's a consumer decision that individuals make. We are not allowed to make that. We can't make that as the federal government sitting in the capital of the United States.
I am not aware of any law that would prevent us from making that decision. I am certain that there would be a cost impact of that decision.
I wonder if the cost impact is going, would be as much as $90,000 or whatever. Frankly, we see the history that we tried to make this effort of playing the offset game and trying to play, do a smoke and mirror game rather than saying specifically, we want to buy it from these locations, and we will not buy, the federal government will not buy coal unless, basically anything that has that emissions, especially when the fact that we have facilities that are zero emission generators. And I like to open that up for conversation. As if think about what we're doing here. We ought to do conservation. It's not just environmentally responsible, it's economically responsible. But if you've got the ability to make sure that you have zero greenhouse emissions caused by your electricity use, when do we stand up and say we're willing to do the right thing and set an example for the rest of the country? I guess the argument is, how do I face off with the people in Ohio and tell them they have to do without if those of us in Washington, D.C. won't do without? Go for it, EPA.
I think you're asking some very important questions. I think what the federal government is doing is getting organized to make important progress in all of the areas that you're mentioning. And I think what's important when you think about renewable energy, when you think about greenhouse gas emissions, is you put together a strategy from how to get from where you are today to where you need to get
tomorrow. Where are we today? What is the total emissions of the electricity that we're using on Capitol Hill today? What is the total emissions annually of the electricity we're using today on this hill?
We can get you the numbers of what the greenhouse gas inventory is for the federal government. That is what the agencies are working to put together as a result of executive order that we've been talking about. As part of that executive order, each agency has been asked to put together an aggressive greenhouse gas reduction target and then put together a strategy for how to meet that target. For the Department of Energy, we've put together a goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 28% by the year 2020. And to do that, we will be investing more in renewable energy. We'll be doing more with energy efficiency, and we'll be addressing our fleet issues. And we'll be doing it across that full portfolio in as cost-effective a means as possible.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, I'm just saying that I grew up working on pollution problems, and the one thing I realize, it's a lot easier not to dump the sewage into the environment than it is to try to clean it up later. So I'd like us to go be proactive and eliminate the emissions rather than mitigate them. Thank you.
I think that you're addressing one of the missions of this subcommittee, and obviously we're going to be holding more hearings looking at the reports that we get from your various agencies. It's important that we have this discussion, and we definitely will allow time to continue this discussion until we hit on something. I can concur with our distinguished ranking member. I also am from California. I worked in Sacramento, and I remember flying down into this gunky kind of airspace. You remember that? And so I remind former Governor Jerry Brown that he talked about the environment before most people could spell it. That was in the 70s. And so we took it on. And now I happily fly into my city of Los Angeles, and I can see the water. But I tell you, it was really bad. So we're going to continue.
Yeah, for the
these.
record, LA Basin has twice as many people and twice as clean air.
Yeah, we've worked on it over the years. I'll now yield to Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate this meeting and the panelists. My thoughts and questions are variation what the ranking member's talking about. I enjoy coming to a meeting in a building that's far from green to talk about these issues, and parked in front of this meeting and every meeting, committee meeting we have in this building, and the Energy Committee meets in this building as well, are SUVs the size of Detroit. I don't know why people in this town feel the need that the only way they can get around is in a vehicle that large with a perfectly good subway system. Several of us ride bikes, but I think the point the ranking member was getting to is it's up to us. And I'm there as the sponsor of LEED certified building ordinance, which passed in Cook County, third largest in the country. We actually have new courthouses that are being built that are LEED certified. It's up to us. What we learned there is that we were creating markets. Government's such a large purchaser, not just the federal, but state and local. We can change things, which gets to the point the ranking member is. We have to look beyond what we're trying to do here. And the variation of that I want you to comment on, if you would, is the standards that you're talking about. When we started, we were just happy to pass a bill, and we thought any standards were fine. Now we've heard of concerns, perhaps, beyond that with Energy Star standards as it relates to the consumer level at least, but also occasionally with LEED. Is, who's deciding where we can go as technology changes, as our needs change, as the needs change to do this? Is LEED where we need to be? Are there others that we're looking at? Are we pushing the envelope in other manners?
Thank you for that question. At the moment, I think LEED is I know LEED is the best rating system that is in the market in the United States today. We did a study in 2006 with Pacific Northwest National Laboratories to ascertain that. The Energy Independence and Security Act asks us to repeat that study once every 5 years, and we'll be commencing the follow-on study next year. It's not, on the other hand, a standard. The most recent standard, which GSA and the Department of Energy and EPA have all been working on together with a variety of other public, state, private entities, is the ASHRAE Standard 189.1 for sustainable buildings. It's a comprehensive standard language standard for green buildings, and it, for example, the law currently requires us to be 30% better than the ASHRAE Energy Code, and this particular green building standard achieves that within the code standard language. If I were predicting, I would say that the decision we make 5 years from now may be different. I would expect the standards to increase. I know that the Energy Code itself in the ASHRAE committee is getting more stringent as technology and adoption of that technology has gotten greater throughout the industry, and I would expect the subsequent revisions of the Energy Code to become much closer to what the government is trying to do today.
I would agree with GSA. However, I think there are a number of folks that feel that while LEED provides a good application, there's a considerable variability in the LEED approach, which as one is using the point system, that two buildings that may receive the same LEED rating may have considerable variability, for example, in energy consumption. So the focus on specific applications may not be the same. So there's a considerable interest, and EPA would support that in raising the bar on some of those applications. I think that's going to happen over time. We would agree that LEED is a very usable across-the-board application at this time, and one that we should focus on.
And I think these are the types of discussions that the agencies do engage in as part of their interagency working groups. And as a result of some of these discussions, what you'll see reflected in the notice of proposed rulemaking that the Department of Energy has out on sustainability principles is sort of a framework for how to approach green rating programs. What you'll see in that notice of proposed rulemaking is that we're not selecting one green building rating system. We're putting forth a set of criteria that we think a green building system ought to meet to be a green building certification system the federal government would use. So what you want are, performance-based metrics, so that you can sort of measure and strive for high performance. You also want there to be a strong verification system so that when you get a certification for the building design, that down the road you go back and check to make sure the building was designed to meet those levels and sort of maintains that level of performance. So we've taken that path. That notice of proposed rulemaking is currently out for public comment, and we're holding a public meeting, I believe, next week, and we'll be happy to come back and share what the outcome of that process is.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And let me begin, first of all, by saying I concur with our friend from San Diego, the ranking member, on the need to shift the federal energy supply from coal to renewable sources. That's why I and so many others in this Congress supported the energy legislation we passed in the House last year, which creates alternative and new and renewable energy markets. Frankly, without that kind of legislative framework, we'll be stuck where we are today. So it's a laudable goal, but we all got to be willing to do the tough lifting to make sure that we can reach that goal. Let me ask Mr. Kamshar, am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Does GSA have different standards, parking standards for federal facilities, transit versus non-transit?
We do not today. However, the executive order has asked us to work with other federal agencies to develop different policies than exist today that are around transit-oriented development and siting of federal locations. The initial recommendations of the working groups have now been made public, and the next step is to make them actual. So today our parking policies are fairly uniform without regard to the existence of transportation. However, our procurements take the location next to leases and new buildings, requiring where they exist that we locate those facilities near public transit and whether it's bus or subway or the like.
If the chair does not object, I would ask that the subcommittee formally request that GSA respond back to us within the next month on what steps it is taking formally to change that policy, because it makes no sense whatsoever to have one uniform standard of parking when you may have a building in the middle of a wheat field in Kansas versus a building in a very congested urban area next to a transit station. Furthermore, frankly, it pits the federal government, not intentionally, against the intentions of the localities. My locality, for example, we've moved heaven and earth to get rail to Dulles. We want to redevelop the Dulles corridor as a transit-oriented development corridor. That means we want to change parking requirements on normal office buildings so that we're encouraging people to get out of the single occupancy vehicles and to use alternative methods of transportation, transit to wit. We need the federal government as a partner if it has facilities in that corridor, not as somebody that stands alone and has its own uniform policies, irrespective of those changes. So if it helps a little bit as a prod, Madam Chairwoman, I would make that request and urge you to, on our behalf, make that request.
Without objection, that will be the order.
I thank the Chairwoman so much.
Thank you.
What about transportation demand management plans, TDMs? Does the GSA have such programs for its federal facilities? And again, does it differentiate between congested urban and suburban and other?
Our experience with those is principally in the Washington, D.C. area where we have used them. For example, we did a rather extensive transit study at the commencement of the development of the White Oak campus in suburban Maryland to make sure that we did not overburden the existing road system. We have provided a lot of, in that context, we've provided encouragement to people through transit subsidies. For example, GSA today provides transit subsidies for nearly half of its employees around the country, a lot of those in Washington, D.C. There are a number of programs that are very community specific to aid not just GSA employees, but all federal employees in finding and using ride sharing and other methods of reducing the transportation impact of the facilities. The executive order also directs us to go further than we have in the past in ensuring that in all of our planning that we not only consult with but plan together with local planning entities. So the states and the counties and the localities with planning goals and zoning rules and so on are re-emphasized in this executive order, that it is an important part of what we should be doing as good citizens of the neighborhoods within which we live.
You know, our colleague from San Diego began by saying he was cynical about the gap between goals and reality, and one can understand. But I guess I see the glass as half full, not half empty. I think the federal government has an incredible opportunity here to actually go from being what it is today, or has been in the past, to actually being the cutting-edge model. And let me just say, nothing could be more exciting to me than to actually see us, the federal government, leading the way in green certification, in pre-development hydrology standards, in saving $6 billion a year in energy costs. If we're committed to the goal of energy independence, we've got to take the lead. So I applaud what you're doing, and I hope you'll be seized with this mission, because here's an opportunity really for us to strike a blow for energy independence and for the environment at the same time. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank this panel for your information provided to us. Know that we will expect to hear from you as mentioned to you. And I'd like to say to all of you, we appreciate the testimony. You have raised issues that will guide this subcommittee in the very near future. As I said, we will have several hearings. We're just beginning this debate. So I will now adjourn the first panel and ask for panel 2. Thank you, and you may take your seats. I would now like to take a moment to introduce our second panel of distinguished members. First, Mr. Henry Green is the president of the National Institute of Building Sciences. And prior to this appointment, Mr. Green served as executive director of the Bureau of Construction Codes in the Michigan Department of Labor for more than 19 years. He was a founding member of the International Code Council Board of Directors, where he served as president. Ms. Helen Vaughn is the policy director for high performance green buildings at the Environmental and Energy Study Institute, where she leads the High Performance Green Building Initiative. She has authored or co-authored several articles, including Beyond Green, High Performance Buildings, which was part of the fall 2009 edition of the MIT Press Journal called Innovations. Now, Ms. Lynn Bellinger is president of the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And Ms. Bellinger is a partner with the Pathfinder Engineers and Architects, LLP, in Rochester, New York, and is ASHA's first female president in society's 116 years history.
About time.
And Mr. Bertrand is vice president of Delphi, where he also serves as president of Delphi's Automotive Holdings Group and Delphi Thermal Systems. And thank you so much for being here this morning. And as you know, it is required of us to ask you to stand and to take the oath. Okay. Okay. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Okay. I would I'd like now to proceed first to Mr. Henry Green for your testimony. Excuse me, would you check your mic, please?
Okay, there we go. I apologize. Someone left a sign that says it's on. So okay.
Everybody lies around here.
We hope not. Starting over, I guess. Thank you very much this morning for allowing me to come in and testify on the state of high performance and green buildings in the federal sector. Congress established the National Institute of Building Sciences in 1974 as an authoritative national source to make findings and to advise the public and private sector on the use of building sciences and technology. The Institute's enabling legislation calls upon federal agencies to work with the Institute when appropriate. Through this engagement with public and private sectors, the Institute provides an unbiased focus on building science. The Energy Policy Act of 2005 called for the establishment of a high-performance building council within the Institute to look at the diversity of codes and standards and to determine the need for implementation of high-performance buildings. The council, with 70-plus private sector organizations, public agencies, produced a report in 2008 based on the 8 attributes of a high-performance building. These are sustainability, cost effectiveness, accessibility, productivity, historic preservation, aesthetics, functionality, and safety and security. These attributes reflect the definition of high-performance building and high-performance green building within the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. The definition also includes sustainability or green as one of the aspects of high-performance buildings. Federal agencies also have requirements that relate to high-performance buildings and attributes beyond energy, water, and sustainability. A sampling of such laws and executive orders includes the Americans with Disabilities Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, Public Buildings Act, National Environmental Policy Act, Executive Orders 1306 13006 historic properties, 12977 security standards, and 12941 and 12699 on seismic safety. With numerous requirements impacting how federal buildings are designed, constructed, and maintained, achieving high performance is challenging, particularly given the complex interactions among these and other requirements. As High Performance Council reported, common metrics are needed to provide consistent, comparable measurements for the individual attributes and to understand and address the interactions across attributes. No single organization or profession has the knowledge or expertise to fully integrate the attributes into a clear path to high performance. But the High Performance Building Council, with its broad-based membership, can facilitate the coordination and cooperation needed to achieve delivery of high-performance buildings. However, since the completion of the initial report, resources have not been available to continue this effort. Once the metrics are identified and performance levels to reach high performance must be agreed upon, the underlying standards as well as research and development in both the societal and building sciences must be supported. Agencies have significant resident expertise on the individual aspects of high performance, but there is no single focal point for integration. The lack of integration should not be attributed to the agencies themselves, but to the fundamentals of the agency structure. Agencies generally focus on their key missions. Achieving high performance will require an integrated design, construction, and operation process that engages key professionals early on and throughout design and construction. The current budget process, with separate capital and operational budgets, is not conducive to this approach. The procurement process also tends to hamper collaboration. Most contractors and subcontractors are engaged after the initial building design is completed, so components and systems addressing high performance attributes have been selected without their input and expertise. Some agencies have identified best practices and technologies and contribute to achieving high performance. These should also be shared and expanded. The Whole Building Design Guide, supported by 11 federal agencies, can serve as a repository for such case studies and validations. Several concepts have been, will assist in achieving federal high-performance buildings. Education and training of federal personnel engaged in the procurement, design, construction, and operation of federal buildings. Building information modeling to facilitate holistic approach to building design, construction, operation, and deconstruction through the building's life cycle. Total building commissioning upon completion of the building, retro commissioning, and periodic recommissioning. Utilization of integrated processes resulting in holistic and efficient approaches to meeting the numerous requirements placed on federal buildings. The Department of Homeland Security's high-performance-based design project within the Science and Technology Infrastructure and Geophysical Division illustrates how the range of attributes can be used in developing high-performance buildings. This project integrates blast protection, chemical, biological, and radiological protection, along with energy, sustainability, durability, air and water protection, and other major building requirements. With an integrated approach, high-performance buildings can be achieved. The structure to achieve this goal is partially in place, but there needs to be a sustained effort to bring about the collaboration and consistency essential to bring high-performance federal buildings to fruition. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairwoman Watson, Ranking Member Bilbray, members of the subcommittee, and staff for this opportunity to present our views on federal green building progress and practices. I have a written statement for the record that I'd like to summarize in the slides that I hope you can see. My name is Ellen Vaughn, and I lead the Buildings Initiative at the Environmental and Energy Study Institute. This is a nonprofit policy education group here in Washington. High-performance green buildings are an essential part of EESI's mission to advance sustainable solutions to climate change and other critical issues. Slide 2 shows what we mean by a high-performance building. It is energy efficient at its core. It is green. It is energy efficient, green, And maybe it's a VA hospital that must deliver high performance in accessibility for disabled vets, lots of natural light and good indoor air quality to promote healing and well-being. And maybe it's in a historic building that must be preserved. Henry mentioned seismic standards. Certainly a green building destroyed by an earthquake is not sustainable. So all these things are achievable, but it requires a holistic approach to planning, designing, and retrofitting. If these goals were considered separately, as an afterthought, or not at all, they would not likely be achieved. Slide 3 shows the evolution of the legal framework and resources for creating energy-efficient, green, high-performance buildings in the public and private sectors. We're grateful to this committee for your leadership in putting the definition of high-performance buildings in the 2007 Energy Bill. This lays the foundation for the important work ahead in achieving high-performance buildings. Slide 4 discusses the shades of green again, in that federal agencies have been leading in every shade of green for years, and they continue to break the mold. A GSA border station for port of entry, for example, can it provide superior indoor air quality despite the exhaust from idling vehicles? Can it provide lots of view glass? Can it be energy efficient? Can it protect against security threats and come in on budget? Yes, GSA has accomplished this by setting these and other performance goals at the beginning and throughout the project with each member of the team. In slide 5, this shows further evolution in federal building performance, and this requires government-wide performance targets and standards, consistent guidance, holistic planning, life cycle budgeting, a nonlinear integrated approach to design, and simple design tools. New capabilities for training with 3D virtual buildings make this possible like never before. Slide 6. Congress has shown leadership by requiring performance targets such as reduced energy consumption and the statutory authority for high-performance buildings. Congress can further enable federal buildings to lead by example by funding training, standards development, R&D, testing, demonstration, and information dissemination that is focused on high performance. And finally, in slide 7, federal agencies can rise to the challenge with the right resources. They already are making amazing progress in spite of stacks of requirements and FEMP's elimination of whole building training courses. We question who the ombudsman is or the coordinator for high performance. Is it FEMP or is it GSA? DOE's proposed rulemaking on sustainable design is a great thing to see. It folds in the executive order and the MOU on sustainable building principles. So why doesn't it address fossil fuel reduction requirements at the same time? They are connected. Renewable energy supply needs must be determined. Federal procurement will help drive the market for renewable energy production in this country. International high-performance building standards, such as German Passive House and the Swiss Minergie, should be studied and utilized. Federal procurement of high-performance green materials, innovative technologies, and best practices in design services will stimulate the market for better buildings nationwide. What green building pioneers have started, federal agencies can propel toward a revolution in the building industry like we have seen in electronics and communications. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Chairwoman Watson, Ranking Member Bilbray, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about standards and opportunities for the federal government to optimize building efficiency. My name is Lynn Bellinger, and I am president of ASHRAE, an international engineering society of over 52,000 members in more than 140 countries. Our members represent the breadth of professionals involved in the built environment, from consulting engineers and architects to manufacturers' representatives and academics. ASHRAE fulfills its mission to serve humanity and promote a sustainable world through research, standards writing, publishing, and continuing education. We are the acknowledged experts on energy in buildings and indoor environmental quality. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the federal government's role in greening buildings. ASHRAE has long partnered with the federal government on this very issue, working to reduce energy waste while developing and consistently improving energy efficiency standards and advanced design guidance. In the 1970s, during this nation's first modern energy crisis, the federal government approached ASHRAE to develop a standard to address the energy use of buildings. This standard became ASHRAE Standard 90.1, which now serves as a federal building standard. Through the High Performance Building Congressional Caucus Coalition, ASHRAE has taken the lead role in raising awareness of high-performing buildings in Congress. Over the past 2 years, the coalition has held 27 briefings for federal policymakers on a wide range of building-related issues. My presidential theme is modeling a sustainable world. Building modeling represents one of the most powerful tools for optimizing building performance. And to exploit the full capability of modeling tools, we must transform our design approach from a sequential process, where one discipline completes its work and hands off the design to the next, to an integrated building design process, where all of the disciplines involved in the building design and construction work as a team from the beginning to evaluate options and optimize building design. Our biggest challenge is implementing integrated design in daily practice. It's going to require a cultural shift in our industry to transform the design process, and it's a shift that has to occur if we're going to reach our goal of net zero energy buildings. To accelerate this cultural shift, we recommend creating a new demonstration program with selected geographically diverse federal buildings. Earlier this year, in partnership with USGBC and the Illuminating Engineering Society, ASHRAE published Standard 189.1, the first code-intended commercial green building standard in the United States. Standard 189.1 serves as a compliance path of the International Green Construction Code, published by the International Code Council. Standard 189.1 is a game changer in building standards, and ASHRAE recommends authorizing a pilot program with a select group of geographically diverse federal buildings to examine the effects of requiring all new federal buildings to meet the IGCC by 2020 and include ASHRAE Standard 189.1 as a compliance path. This will help the federal government meet the objectives of Executive Order 13514 of ensuring that beginning in 2020, all new federal buildings are designed to achieve zero net energy by 2030. In addition to Standards 90.1 and 189.1, ASHRAE has design tools and initiatives targeted for enhanced building performance, including certification programs and advanced energy design guides. ASHRAE also has developed a building energy labeling program, which clearly shows tenants, building owners, and others the difference between as designed and in operation building energy use, and includes an energy assessment with recommendations for increasing energy efficiency. Congress can help close the gap between the designed and operational energy use of federal buildings by requiring all new and existing federal buildings to put in place within 3 years an energy performance information program that identifies both designed and in-operation performance. Understanding where energy is used in a building is the first step in reducing energy consumption. In closing, significant progress has been made over the years in the federal, commercial, and residential sectors, and we are poised to embark on a new era of energy efficiency and taxpayer dollar stewardship that will lead us to net zero energy buildings. Much work remains to achieve that goal, and as a national and world leader in developing building standards, ASHRAE looks forward to opportunities for working with Congress and the executive agencies as we all move toward a more sustainable tomorrow. Thank you again for the opportunity to address this subcommittee, and feel free to contact me or our DC office if you have any additional questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bellinger, and Mr. Bertrand, you may proceed.
Good morning, Chairwoman Watson and Ranking Member Bill Bray. I'm Jim Bertrand, and as President of Delphi Thermal Systems, I'm Jim Bertrand, and as President of Delphi Thermal Systems, I'm pleased to be a part of this panel, raising awareness and creating focus on the great opportunities for energy savings in our federal buildings and installations. I recognize that implementing the policies and regulations that will govern these reforms presents a significant challenge. We at Delphi want to be part of that dialogue that is used to resolve these questions because we think that we have technology that can solve some of the problems. We are also pleased to share our experiences in presenting our technology to the federal government. We hope that we can provide insights to help improve regulations and policies. Delphi is widely known as an auto parts manufacturer, but the reality is that we are a technology company. We hold over 7,000 patents, and while most of our intellectual property is utilized by automotive manufacturers, there are many non-automotive applications for our technology. One example is our microchannel heat exchanger technology, which has proven successful in both automotive and non-automotive markets. The microchannel heat exchanger has the potential to provide improved energy efficiency and reduce the impact on the environment because it is smaller, lighter, uses less refrigerant, and is able to achieve higher energy efficient ratings. If we replaced one aging heat exchanger in each of the 500,000 federal buildings, there would be 4 immediate benefits. First, 5 to 10 million less pounds of refrigerant in the atmosphere, 10 million fewer pounds of materials, mostly imported copper, more energy efficient optimized heating and cooling systems in reduced spaces, and lastly, energy savings of up to 25 to 30% over traditional AC units with lower ratings. Delphi has sought to offer this solution to the federal government. However, our experience is that the federal effort is focused on achieving building-wide reductions in efficiencies. We applaud this focus, but at the same time, this focus should not come at the cost of incremental but significant gains in efficiency. Better focusing on building components could result in some dramatic results. But from our view, the efforts to date have not yielded powerful enough incentives to accelerate the adoption of innovative green components in federal buildings. Despite these challenges, there are some things that can be done to improve the situation. First, establish incentives for the implementation of energy-efficient components. For example, Delphi is supportive of a provision of the Homestar legislation that establishes powerful additional incentives for homeowners who choose to implement the highest available SEER standards, 18 SEER. Is there an opportunity to create comparable incentives for buildings that are owned or leased by the federal government? The U.S. Green Building Council has also identified existing authority for DOE and the GSA to improve performance standards applicable to federal buildings and leases. Second, examine opportunities for federal procurement reform. Delphi is supportive of elements of legislation that improves federal procurement of energy-efficient building technology, such as Senator Carper's Improving Federal Use of Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Act of 2010. Delphi supports better measurement and data collection to assist in federal energy efforts. We also believe greater flexibility is needed in procurement requirements for federal building projects facing long delays. Technology is changing quickly, and this flexibility allows for the adoption of the best and newest technologies. Third, consider pilot programs to test and analyze retrofit performance. We believe that a pilot program examining implementation costs of retrofits, as well as the short-term and long-term efficiencies and savings of technology upgrades, would be helpful in guiding federal efforts to select energy-efficient technologies. We respectfully recommend that the pilot program should examine technology components. In conclusion, we have already stated that reducing energy consumption is an extremely hard challenge, and we are no experts in creating guidelines like organizations such as the United States Green Building Council. But we do believe that the tools that are at the government's disposal have not been used in a way to encourage rapid adoption of components like our technology that can help the government achieve its goal of greener federal buildings. We are honored to be on this panel and look forward to being part of the continuing dialogue. Thank you, and we look forward to taking any questions you may have.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the members of the panel for your testimony today. And we're now going to move to the question period and proceed under the 5-minute rule. But I want to remark on the testimony, Ms. Vaughn, that you made. You know, I was thinking, and you had your slides up, and you said, you know, green buildings and so on. And I thought about airports, and California was the first state in the union to ban smoking on airlines, and now it's global. But you come out of the airports, and the first breath of air is all of that smoke that gets captured under the eaves because people are taking their last smoke before going in or they're first coming out. And so I would hope that when we talk about green buildings that we would attach and adjacent environments, because I think that you're tremendously at risk when the first breath outside is filled with toxic smoke. And the last breath going in, you got it in your lungs, and it settles there for you the whole time you're inside. So I just had to throw that out, and it occurred to me when you made your testimony, all of you are offering us valuable input as to how we need to proceed from here. And we're talking about prospectively, but we're talking about retrofitting what we have now, and we're keeping in mind the cost. And you know, we have this huge deficit that people are harking at all the time. But there's certain things we need to do now to guarantee the health of people in this country and those coming into this country. And so we're trying to balance between that. But I just wanted to reflect on the testimony that was made. So I'm going to ask all of you, would you please define the zero net energy, and to what extent has the physical comfort of human beings been considered in the movement towards zero net energy usage? And I'll start with you, Mr. Green, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. As I noted in my testimony, the work to do this or to accomplish this is very broad-based. There are a whole number of attributes that have to be looked at in that respect. So when we start looking at the indoor air quality, for example, how we look at achieving zero energy, there's a balance between all the components that are there. So it's going to take not only both the scientific research to get there, but it's also going to talk about human behavior and how we in fact achieve better human behavior in the buildings that we're in. As you noted, once we stop people smoking in the building, the first thing to do is go outside of the building and start smoking. So what we have to do is we have to talk about how do we affect that behavior as well? How do we impact how we use our buildings? How do we impact the future of our buildings by achieving greater utilization today, even in existing buildings? And I think that's part of the difficulty. So your question is, what do we define as zero energy? Zero energy can take on a whole number of different definitions. And I think that the industry, as very broad-based as it is, must come together and also help define what zero energy is. And does it start at the supply? Does it start at the building? Where does it start initially, and then where does it end? And how can we gather all the data necessary that we can make that achievement known? The metrics to get there have to be defined, and also the level of performance. So what we have to do is there is a very long path to follow to get there. So I know I'm not answering your question specifically. I'm just trying to lay the groundwork that there is more work that needs to be done to say, how do we achieve zero?
Get us thinking.
Yes.
Yes, Ms. Vaughn.
Yes, thank you. Yes, there are several different definitions. One of the working definitions of net zero energy is that first you reduce the energy load as much as possible. So your building, it's a low energy building, and it uses only as much energy per year as it can produce on site from renewable sources. That's one working definition. but there are others as well. And how to balance energy efficiency and indoor air quality. We have some fine engineers in the room who are working hard on these things. We have standards like ASHRAE 62. And one of the things that we learned, I think, it's a very good question, you know, back after the 70s when there was a focus on really tightening up buildings, some people forgot that there was an indoor air quality issue if we did that. So there's been a lot of learning and adjusting, and I think a lot of progress in balancing the two, and it is that trade-off that's so key. I would just refer quickly to Passive House, and again, if we can learn, you know, study these best practices and these examples. Passive House in Germany, it's a standard that can reduce energy use to the point where they don't even need a furnace, or improve the building envelope. It's a very focus on high insulation levels. But they have this constant air exchange, and there's, you know, different concerns about how that could work in a hot, humid climate, but people are working on this, so I'm hopeful.
Thank you. Ms. Valentier.
Yes, before I address the current question, I want to respond to your first question about smoking outside airports and public buildings. One of the provisions in ASHRAE Standard 189.1 is prohibiting smoking within 25 feet of an entrance, and there needs to be signage on the building to indicate that. So that's a recognized problem, that you don't want people jumping outside the building and smoking immediately, and that's addressed in that standard. The definition Ms. Vaughn gave for net zero energy buildings is really what we've been using. As Henry noted, there are a lot of different ways to define it. The building owner sees the utility bill, so we're looking at site energy and using a definition of net zero buildings as those that use no more energy on an annual basis than they can produce on site. So that's consistent with what Ms. Vaughn just said. And within Standard 189.1, there is a requirement to comply with two other ASHRAE standards. ASHRAE has Standard 62.1, which is a ventilation standard, and you must comply with the ventilation rates that are required within that standard for the various types of building occupancy in order to comply with 189.1. So you can't avoid bringing in the outside air or the proper amount of ventilation. Another standard that we have is Standard 55, which is a standard for thermal comfort, and 189.1 also requires that you comply with Standard 55. So it's very much looking at the indoor environmental quality as part of doing a high-performance green building.
Thank you. Mr. Burchett.
Chairwoman Watson, at Delphi as an HVAC component supplier, our efforts relative to zero net energy have really focused at the component level and are very much geared towards the development of devices that have minimal impact on the environment. The microchannel technology that I had in my testimony that I referred to is a good example of that, a device that obviously minimizes to the maximum extent possible energy consumption and minimizing environmental impact. So that's really the field of play that we have in the debate.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
now recognize Mr. Bilbray, our ranking member.
Thank you. Just for the record, I want to assure everybody, but California will not have a problem of people smoking outside the way it's going. We are going to outlaw all public smoking in the state of California, at least public smoking of tobacco, okay? Why do people think I'm joking when I say that? I'll put you on an airplane and send you back to Sacramento. And it is interesting to hearing this discussion because we all know that indoor air is a major air pollution issue down the line. Not to make you think that I'm some kind of 70s hippies, but I actually own an Adobe house. But I know my wife, who's from New Orleans, always said she came all the way across the country to live in a mud house. Now, I imagine what our radon numbers are, but it's a good thing that Southern California is not a high radon area. And you remember how we've done that. We sealed up in the 70s, and by the 80s, the one crisis on energy was curtailed, and then we had the radon exposure was the next crisis. And so we kind of go through these series. I want to sort of get around to how we get to this practical application. Mr. Bertrand, you're talking about subcomponents, which really could add up. A good example, I guess, what you're doing is with the electronic aspect on reducing energy consumption. What I need to do more of in my Adobe house, and that is go around and seal up all those little cracks that over 100 years have steadily widened. But you're doing it from an electronic point of view, the component. Seems like, though, that our system, and I'll say this, go back and forth, our system would not be able to accommodate your improvement because we're looking more at the total refrigeration unit or air conditioning unit, not a component that could be plugged into it. Have you run into that problem with our federal process?
I think, to be fair, we could use more clarity on directing our efforts. What we have encountered, as I mentioned, is there's an emphasis on the total building system. There's a lot of energy around, obviously, the new standards for new buildings, but the question of how do we bring innovation to the existing fleet of buildings that we have is one that we think deserves more attention, and one where maybe we don't need to paint such grandiose pictures. We should go after implementation of, there was earlier testimony around how many off-the-shelf technologies there are. Certainly we have some, other companies have them. There are many opportunities out there for us to make a significant improvement in the efficiency of the federal infrastructure.
Those small steps make a lot of difference. And
right.
To paraphrase the Democratic Party, the way you eat an elephant is one small bite at a time. Ms. Bellinger, do we have the ability, seeing that we're not going over to Home Depot and pulling an air conditioner off the shelf and sticking it in as much as some people might think. We're actually designing, engineering, not just the building, but even the electronic components, the refrigeration. Anybody here want to comment on that? And about the ability for us to integrate and look at, get the expertise. Do we have the ability to tap into the expertise to know that these improved components may be out there and may be incorporated into our next big building that we look at? Do we have that capability in-house, or do we have the ability to contract that capability to make sure that the finished product, is that part of the contracts we do when we go to the engineering side, we go to the design side?
Mr. Bilbrey, you certainly have the capability of doing it. The difficulty, I think, today in the way buildings are procured don't facilitate that kind of collaboration. The problem today is that on one hand you have a design component that designs a building. There are design engineers that are engaged in the design of the subsystems and the total building system, architectural engineering, which includes mechanical, plumbing, etc. They design a building based upon their best practice or their understanding. They may not reach out as broadly as going to a manufacturer of components to determine exactly what's new in the marketplace. Now, once the building is designed and it's been approved, it's started construction, and you can't go back and change when you find that there's something new or innovative that you could include in the building. Because now we have a set of design documents that you have a bid process that said, here's what you're going to build and here's what you're going to get. The capability of doing this is to go back to a systems approach and then doing what we would call an approach to design that is by not specification but performance, allowing the performance factors to determine how the building is designed and making it and incentivizing during the construction process if there is in fact a way to change the project from its design in the construction process that would yield additional savings and or better performance. And again, based upon performance, not specification.
Right, and that's what, outcome-based, let me just tell you something. All the time I've been frustrated with environmental strategies or whatever is that when the federal government goes to process-based instead of outcome-based, one of the things I'm very, very proud of as a Californian is so much of our environmental programs are successful, like our Clean Air, like our Clean Ocean Plan, is that unlike the feds that like the Clean Water Act, which are process-based, outcome-based is truly the environmental step. It's an evolutionary step beyond that. But before I leave, let me just say, ask for your indulgence. I'd like to get down to one issue that we need to address. We may talk about these components, but one thing I learned at the Air Resources Board in California was before we allowed somebody to transfer a component into an automobile, even selling aftermarket, we prove longevity. And before I leave that analogy, I want to say one thing. Just as we forced the auto industry to go from carburetors to injectors, though they didn't want to, but to come up to the efficiency of clean and mileage, they had to go to a different technology. We need to put the same pressures on ourselves to kind of force us to be on our game. But when it comes down to longevity, when you take one of these components, let's just say you do have an efficient one, are we doing the testing, and how do we make sure that a unit is not just effective the day you buy it, but over 5, 10, 15 years? Because there's where you will find marked difference in certain type of technologies. And we've run into that in the air emissions issue with automobiles, where we literally had to outlaw products that looked good when you first bought them, but became major environmental problems later. Do we have that strategy when it comes to this kind of efficiency, like the STAR program?
The other panel's members may want to comment further on the details on the procurement process. The nature of our products some of them can decay in terms of performance over time. So, Congressman, you're onto a very real issue, which is the efficiency at a component level at the start of the life versus later on, and looking at that total life cycle cost development, I believe, is a very important aspect, and should be, if it isn't, strongly featured in the entire government procurement process, as you would look to put precious taxpayer dollars to work to make sure the components we are putting in have the sustainability and will hold up over time and still deliver that performance level.
In fact, Madam Chair, I appreciate giving me the time. I'd like to make a statement. I sure hope somebody is listening about this. Of all the years working on environmental oversight stuff, I'll bring a little street knowledge to you. I believe the E-STAR program needs to move on, needs to become more, more effective. I believe that there should be an E-STAR standard that starts off with the initial efficiency that we use today. But there ought to be longer-term ratings to where we have 2 or 3 or 4 numbers, so people understand that this product is very effective today. It'll be effective in 2 years. It'll be effective in 10. But at 12, there's going to be major problems. And that the consumer knows that because we have done the testing. And that may seem like a whole big drawn-out thing, but let me tell you something. Every aftermarket product that is sold in this country goes through that for automobiles. It's time we take a look at the same thing when we talk about efficiency. So those numbers, that E-STAR, really means something beyond just how well something works today. And that means that we've got to do the research, because I think all of us agree we're doing things to try to save this planet and trying to do it quickly and effectively, but where it really is going to pay off is the cumulative impact as long as the technology continues to operate. If it doesn't, everything we're doing is really for show. Thank you very much.
I want to thank all the witnesses today. As you have just heard in the ranking member's comments, this is a burgeoning area of concern to our federal government. And those of us who have worked at local government and state government have been challenged by these issues, particularly those of us on the West Coast. So this is just the beginning of this dialogue that we will be having, and technologies are being invented every single day that must be taken into consideration as we go for green building. So thanks to all of the witnesses. Your input goes into the record. And Mr. Ranking Member, without objection, I would like to also thank the other members that were here, but without objection, we'll adjourn this meeting.